many of you know, I grew up in Northeast Indiana. I still have family in Northeast Indiana. And if you've never been, it's very flat. It's very flat. God took the mountains and squished them low and the valleys and brought them up. God made the roads straight. And when I went to seminary, I knew that I didn't have a job waiting for me in northern Indiana. The bishop said, I will send you to seminary, but we don't have any jobs. And I said, that's okay, I want to leave here anyway. And so when I was in seminary, my senior year, I began interviewing with different dioceses, and I was speaking with the canon from Mississippi, and he said, oh, I've got a great church for you in the Mississippi Delta. And I thought to myself, the Delta is a hotter, flatter version of Indiana with much bigger mosquitoes. No, thank you. And God said, okay, you'll be there in 3 years. And I spent 9 years, almost 10 years in the Mississippi Delta, and it is hot and flat, and the mosquitoes are huge. And that's where I met Jennifer and started our family. And there are some beautiful flat places in the world, and one of the greatest privileges we have as Americans is the ability to drive across these United States. And I am one of those odd people that loves a long drive, and I figure if this doesn't work out, I can become a long-haul trucker. That's my backup. And this last August, we went to Utah for a Shelby family reunion, all on my dad's side. And on the way back, we went through Nevada, and we took Highway 6 through the Grand Basin National Park. And it is so flat, but on either side are these beautiful mountains just reaching, almost clawing their way into the sky, and these huge boulders that look just like God threw them down. Everything looks recent, like it just happened, because in the east, there's plants everywhere, and everything's eroded, and there's moss growing, and in the west, there's no water, so nothing grows. In the ancient world, this talk of land that was flat and straight, that was a huge deal to those audiences because travel was so extremely dangerous. Nobody traveled by themselves if they could help it. Travel meant that you would likely be attacked by wild animals, and if not wild animals, then wild people, or maybe both. And if you did travel, you tried to find some big guy who could wield a stick pretty handily. Because around every corner was the very real possibility of danger. Up every mountain was the very real possibility of somebody there to kill you and take all your belongings. And so this idea of a broad, flat road where you can see forever was a balm, was a joy, a thing almost of fantasy. Imagine if someone came to us and said, imagine PVE or all the South Peninsula with wide roads where people can park on the side of the road and you can still drive down the road. Imagine a land of sidewalks where people can walk their dogs not in the middle of the road, but on the sidewalk. Imagine a land of public transportation that gets you to where you're going in a timely and reliable manner. Can you imagine if we could get to Los Angeles downtown in half an hour on public transportation? Not the 2.5 hours. We would be overjoyed. We would want that. Yes, bring us that public transportation. Bring us these sidewalks. Bring us these nice wide roads where we're not almost hitting people walking their dogs Not that I almost ever hit anybody walking their dog. But to them, that idea of broad, flat, safe roads was almost a fantasy, a dream, something to be hoped for. One of the ancient theologians, Origen of Alexandria, was declared a heretic in the 5th or 6th century, and he was declared a heretic because he was a universalist. After studying the Word for several years, he decided that God loved everybody, that all flesh shall see salvation, as we hear in the gospel today. All flesh shall see salvation. And he said to himself, how can a loving and merciful God send anybody to hell for eternity? And the church in its wisdom said, well, we don't like that at all. This guy's a heretic. But Origen has some amazingly good teachings, and one of his teachings that I studied in particular for this gospel. I am not a scholar of Origen. Don't ask me any other questions about Origen. I've exhausted my knowledge. But Origen said that our minds, our hearts, our souls, when we go into a city, we make a map of that city, especially the places where we grow up, and we know how to get around in those cities. We know which streets to take, which streets will have the less traffic. We know where to go if we want to see the pretty houses and the ocean. We know what not to take and what to take. And those cities are mapped in our minds. And he said, in the very same way, in our walk with Christ, our ability to reach Christ is mapped on our hearts. And he said, what if Isaiah and John the Baptist, quoting Isaiah, and Baruch, weren't talking about a literal lowering of mountains and raising of valleys, but rather they were figuratively talking about our hearts. What gets in the way of us coming to Christ? Does it take us 2.5 hours with a lot of stops and a lot of waiting to get to Christ when it should really only take 20 minutes? What are our valleys? What are our mountains? Who's lying in wait to ambush us? So often I find that my mountains, my valleys, the robbers, the wild animals that keep me from Christ are of my own doing. My mountains don't have to be there. So many of them, so many of the things that keep me from Christ are grudges or anger or resentment or jealousy at other people, at the situation in the world. What Origen was saying was that we can take those mountains down and we can raise those valleys up. Baruch says, let us put on the garment of righteousness. Let us put on the garment of righteousness. I don't know about you all, but this is a righteous garment. I might get one of these for myself and wear it on the Riviera. I wouldn't be out of place if I wore it in LAX. Holy cow. There are some outfits there. But the righteous garment Baruch is talking about isn't so much a righteous garment, but a way of living. Let us put on a righteous garment, the righteousness of God. Let us see God where God is. Let us not look at life as a series of obstacles and impediments, but let us look at life as the blessing that it is. Because life is always a blessing. Because as difficult as this world is the world that we have. The life that we have been given. And God didn't put us into this world to suffer. God put us into this world to rejoice. To love as we are called to love. To be loved as we are called to love. And so in the midst of suffering, of anger, of jealousy, of resentment, of grief, we put on the robe of righteousness. We adjust how we're looking at the world. We look for the blessings in the world. And sometimes those blessings can seem very small. Thank you for these shoes. They're nice shoes, Liz. Thank you for my socks. Not as nice as my shoes. Thank you for my glasses. Thank you for my dentist. We begin naming things that we normally take for granted, that we don't give thanks for at the table or before bed. We begin naming all of these things for which we ought to be thankful, for which we are thankful when we are asked about it. And we realize how much God has given us, because the person who can't breathe and is able to breathe again is thankful for breath. And so let us put on the garment of righteousness. Let us see that God has raised the valleys and lowered the mountains and created a straight path to love, to joy, to the life to which we are called. Amen.